I think for today's diary entry, I think I'm going to talk about the really tragic story of my first two rabbits. Um, I might break this up because I don't want these videos to be so long that even I don't want to listen to them. Um, my experience with pets until I had rabbits was pretty much cats and parrots. We raised and trained, and we would show African grays and cockatoos, and we had mynah birds and finches and crested canaries and every kind of Persian cat you can possibly imagine. But rabbits were never on the radar. And my son and I, we were living in an apartment in Phoenix, and we had had a cat for several years. That's a whole nother video. You wouldn't think it would be funny, but it actually was. She was kind of part of our family for, she lived way too many years. I think she died 12 times. Anyhow, she had passed on a couple years before, and we thought, well, maybe let's get another pet. So I went over the lease and was kind of seeing what they thought about pets because I never asked when we moved in, and it specifically said cats and dogs. And so we started trying to think out of the box. I thought, well, we're not going to do a parrot because I didn't want to do that to the neighbors. They can get really loud and they really can be destructive. And so, anyhow, we're driving down the road one day on the way to the grocery store, and just out of nowhere, I said to my son, a rabbit. And he said, "What?" I said, "Let's get a rabbit." I said, "It's it's it's kind of like a cat, but only different." And they didn't note it in the lease. And so I thought I was being smart. So basically, the rabbit number one came to us in the usual way. They were cute, and it was a neat idea, and we had no clue. So we started looking at ads on Craigslist, of course, and I saw this picture. And like the picture that you're looking at, that's him. His name was Albert. Only that little thing in the picture shrunk down. He just looked like a tiny ball of scribble white with two little black spots that maybe there was eyes in there. And they had him sitting on a couch. And I thought that's it right there. And so we contacted him and we went to pick him up, and he was kept in he just this house was enormous, and he had the best of everything. I didn't know at the time, but super expensive everything. And his cage was sitting in this beautiful bay window, and apparently, according to what the woman described to me, the only time she ever took him out of the cage was for about an hour a day, in which time the kids chased him around and so forth. So it wasn't very good. And she said that she was getting rid of him because she was pregnant again, so she didn't have time for him. And in hindsight, I have an opinion about that, but at the time I just had no idea. And so she already had him in the carrier. And so I kind of bent over to see him, and he was completely in the back, terrified. And she reached in to grab him, and he just about took her hand off, which also in hindsight tells me a few things. But again, I had no idea. So she pulled him out, and I to this day he was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I she picked him up and proceeded to kind of show me how to groom him. It was even not knowing, watching it was hard. She just kind of had him hanging in the air, and his face covered, and started raking on his stomach, and I thought, oh. And so she handed him to me, and weirdly enough, he didn't fight to get away. I snuggled him up to my neck, and I remember whispering into his ear, How would you like to come and stay with us forever? So, skip forward, we went ahead and packed him up and brought him home. And it was about a week later, and I was completely convinced that I had brought home the living spawn of the devil. He, I couldn't stand him to watch him in the cage. It didn't take me maybe 2 days to figure out that that just wasn't going to work for me. I didn't know how overall everything was going to work itself out, but he was not going to live in that cage. So it started with weird things, like I would put little cardboard fences around the door so he could expand out. And and it was weird too. It was almost like he was afraid to be away from his cage. When I'd let him out, he'd constantly go back and check on his cage. That cage was his security. But you couldn't get within 20 feet of him. You had to be smart enough to figure out how to wrangle him in with nothing. So eventually what I did was I started letting him run around the house. Again, so I can't believe he wasn't electrocuted. There wasn't all kinds of sorts of things that didn't happen to him. I found wires chewed up. He chewed up my HDMI cord. He destroyed an $800 rug. And, but, and so again, I had no experience. And I actually ran an ad to try to rehome him. And I don't know why, but just, a random thought. I thought to myself, I'm gonna kind of just sort of look up rabbits. And what I ended up finding out was all the terrible things that happen to rabbits when they're adopted. How people come to having rabbits the way that I did, or similar ways. And they have no clue what they're getting into, or how expensive it is, or how much work it is, or if you care about the animal, um, the compromises that you have to make. So I did some research and I got a hold of the Bramley Hedge. Shout out to them, by the way. That's probably the reason he lived as long as he did. The Bramley Hedge Rabbit Rescue in Phoenix, fabulous people. I took him down there. They literally kept him groomed for me for the first few months. They taught me almost everything. And so I started bunny proofing and doing all the things that you're supposed to do, including I would lay on the floor for hours and hours at a time to try and, help him trust me. I would sleep on the floor. And finally, what I started doing was whenever I'd walk by him, I'd reach down and just kind of scratch behind his ears, not grab him, not touch him, just other than that, and say, "Hi, love you," just to acknowledge him. And this went on for a couple of months. And one day I was in the kitchen and Albert comes walking by and he stops and he bumps my ankle with his nose and then walks on like he was saying hi. And that was kind of the beginning of everything. And he went everywhere with me. And I mean everywhere. I would specifically sleep on the floor sometimes just so that because he'd like snuggle up by my feet, or if I was on my side, he'd crawl up on my shoulder. He went shopping, he went camping. There was nothing he didn't do. Um and one day, this is about, I guess I'd had him for 2 years, and I thought, he needs a friend. And again, no matter how much you know, what you figure out is how dumb you really are. So no matter how much I knew, I still knew nothing. And so I decided I'm going to get another rabbit. And I meant to get it off of Craigslist, kind of as to maybe try to rescue one from Craigslist. And so we went down, and this will be the second half of the story, but we went down, and that's when we got B. We used to call her Miss B. Her name was Beatrix. And she was very young, and Albert hated her, and she absolutely loved him. And I had no idea that you had to introduce rabbits to each other, okay? Now, luckily, I didn't have a lot of problem with that. Albert would just sit seething while B would snuggle in all of that fur that he's got. And but she did grow up and they did get used to each other and they did become quite a pair. But her story is that's a separate story. So I guess we had about 2.5 years with Albert and B together. And one day, Albert started constantly grooming his mane. And I hope I don't have to start pausing the video here. You hear I keep having to clear my throat. So he keeps constantly grooming his mane. And, you know, what I don't understand about vets is if you go in there and you have any information that you've researched, whether it's Google or the library or what YouTube, whatever, they say we don't prescribe to Dr. Google. Excuse me. But if you go in there with no information, they'll tell you things like, there's a lot of good information on Google. And that's part of how I ended up in this situation. And so it went from him constantly grooming his mane to his mane was wet all the time. I did not know that he was drooling. And it got worse. And it got worse until I literally went back to the vet and I'm in the parking lot and I'm crying and I'm kind of half yelling at the vet, not at the vet, but about what's going on. Look at him. I can't fix this. Google can't fix this. Something is wrong. And I brought B. I said, look at B. I take care of my rabbits. This is something that I don't know what this is. He needs to be here. Okay. So I found out that when I originally got him from that lady, she told me, she said, I need to let you know he's been dropped. The kid's running around with him. And I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't even know enough to, to think anything of it. Come to find out, his jaw was broken. And so it had never been dealt with, so he sat in pain forever until it healed up. But what it did was, it was the beginnings of what started horrendous, undescribably horrific dental issues. And I had him on the schedule for surgery. They had to run him through with antibiotics and so forth. The vet never told me what to maybe expect, that he could stop eating, that he could have reaction to the medicine, none of that. I didn't know about critical care. And so they sent me home with all of these medicines, and it was a few days before Thanksgiving. And it was like a day or so after giving him the medicine, I walked in the room and he was under my chair on his back, which he never did. And I started like screaming and shaking him, and he actually didn't move for quite a while. And finally he flipped over. And then he stopped eating. And I was so stupid that I was afraid I would feed him the wrong things. I didn't know what to feed him if he couldn't chew. And I called the vet, and the vet said to come and get the critical care. And I thought, well, maybe you should have given me some of that to come home with. I live 50 miles one way from the vet. So there is no emergency vet. So I drive all the way up there. I get the critical care. I come back. I don't know how to mix it right. And I stop at the grocery store. She told me to get some baby food. I can't get the critical care thinned out enough where it makes sense to me to give it to him. So I'm trying to feed him baby food through a syringe. And as I'm feeding him, he starts like making these weird movements. He's in the middle of the floor in my bedroom. And stuff starts coming out of his eyes. And my mom was on the phone in the background on the speaker. And I'm yelling, I don't know what's happening. And she said, Eva, he's dying. Tell him you love him. Tell him it's okay. Tell him it's okay to go. He was in so much pain for so long, and I never knew it. And in the end, weirdly enough, even with all of the dental issues, I feel like I probably suffocated him with the baby food. But they say that it's harder to lose a close pet than it is to lose a loved one. And, I always thought, no, that really can't be right. But my mother died recently, and it is correct. It's right. The commitment that you make to an animal is entirely different than the commitment to a person. With a person, there's some kind of expectations. But with an animal, you have to commit good and bad whether you like it or not. And so when he died, I sat on my bed with his body on the floor, and I literally did not know what to do. I had stuff out to make earrings. And so I made a pair of earrings. I was crying so hard I couldn't even see what I was doing. I can't describe how you just don't know what to do, where to sit or to move or what to think, or I don't know. Now, what's really weird is, and I would say it was because I was just so overwhelmed and emotional. Okay, so that's really what I thought for a while. But I have some other stories that I don't think that's what it was. When he died, there was little lights that would spin around the chandelier. Crazy, I know. Laugh or turn the video off, call me nuts. I know. I'm just telling you it is what it is. There were these little lights, and the room was almost foggy. And the next day, my mom called me up and she said, you're going to think I'm crazy. And I said, okay. And she said, I think Albert was here last night. And I said, really? I said, and I was actually jealous. I was mad. I was like, well, why would he come see you? And she said, I'm sure it was. She said, it hopped like a rabbit. It looked like a rabbit. And it scared the crap out of me. She said, I told it, you need to go now. And he hopped off and hopped up on her bed and like hopped into nothingness. And because this gets weird, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer like three months later. And the entire time that after he died, all the way through my experience with B until she died, Albert, he was always there. And I'll tell you it more in detail with B's story, but the only times that I actually saw him, like if you want to call it a ghost or whatever you want to call it, was um, before something happened. And I saw him again before B died. And I mean, I saw him. I saw him out of the corner of my eye. B was also white. I thought I was talking to him like he was B. That's how it really was. When I went in the other room, B had been asleep under my chair the entire time. I was hanging stuff on the wall. And so I saw him out of the corner of my eye. And it was almost exactly 2 months later that she died. So, yeah, that's the story of Albert. And that's how I came to rescue rabbits, is because by the time the Albert and B story ended, well, I know a lot more now. I know enough to know I don't know anything. That's worth something. But I figure if I save enough rabbits, I can maybe make up for what I did. I wouldn't wish it on anyone to lose a pet that you're that close to. I mean, it's bad to lose any kind of pet or loved one or anything. But this happened in November of 2021. And I think about it. I still think about it every day. Anyhow, thank you for listening, I guess, if you did. If not, I hope this isn't so long that even I don't want to listen to it in the future. All right. I'll tell you guys about B maybe in the next video.